Greetings, brothers and sisters, the Dharma. Welcome to the Dhamma Zoom. We have Ajahn Asoko in the room with us today. Let us all now put our palms together and then pay respects to Ajahn. 3 bows, please. First bow. Second bow. We shall begin today's session with paying respects to the Triple Gem by chanting the Araham. Araham Sama Sambuddho Bhagava Buddham Bhagavantam Abhivademi. Sakadu Bhagavata Dhammo Dhamma Namasami Subhadipano Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sanghang Namami. So, Ajahn, over to you now.
Yeah. Greetings to all. I just see a couple of faces here on my side, familiar faces, but welcome to everyone. So it was suggested we start with just a 10 minutes guided meditation, really just sitting together. So please just sit comfortably. And whether we have 10 minutes or whether we have an hour, the instructions for practice are always the same. It's just coming back to here and now. We're practicing knowing the present moment as it is. It's always using the body, noticing what the body feels like right now. And remember, it's always about knowing the present moment as it is, rather than trying to make it into anything special. So taking notice of the way the body feels. As it's sitting, noticing what that feels like in the body right now. Sitting here, noticing what the mind is like. The point being to relax. Remember Ajahn Chah telling Luang Por, meditation is a holiday of the heart. So what is that for us right now? It means for 10 minutes we can just let go of any concerns and worries and preoccupations. Just let it be. And it means we can just relax. Relaxing into the present moment as it is. Noticing the body as it sits, feels like this. The in breath and the out breath feel like this. The state of mind is what it is. It's restless or relaxed, energetic or tired. Just being willing to allow the body and the mind to be like this right now. Not asking anything of them, just being with here and now.
Thank you, Tanajan. We now request for the Dharma. The Brahma Sahampati, Lord of the world, with palms joined in reverence, requested the favor. Beings are here with but little dust in their eyes. Pray, teach the Dharma out of compassion for them. Rama Chaloka Dibadi Sahampati Kata Jalina Divaranaya Jata Santi Dasata Paraja Kajatika They say Dhamma Anukam Imam Pacha.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. When we're practicing, like we just took a few moments to do, there's one simile that comes to mind quite often that the Buddha uses in describing how to set up mindfulness in the mind and how to keep watch over the mind. And he's comparing it to how a guard would look after a city. He's guarding a city, guarding the entrance gates to the city, watching who comes in and who leaves. He patrols the walls to make sure the walls are in good shape. There are no openings in the walls, no back doors that are left open. And he patrols the walls around the city, checking on the horizon, looking out for danger. And it's a very good simile to keep in mind when we're practicing, because one thing that happens with the practice as the mind gets quiet is that we can very easily start really enjoying the peace and quiet in the mind, which is a good thing. But if we're not vigilant, if we're not careful of what we're looking out for and how we're looking, it's very easy to just be sitting here and the body is still, it's comfortable, relaxed. And the mind starts feeling at ease in this peaceful body, and we kind of very gently and very quickly slide off into a kind of zone, into some comfortable little cloud when we just drift with the wind. And we're actually just drifting with pleasant feelings in the mind, pleasant feelings in the body. And we can spend a whole hour sitting like that, just drifting with these pleasant sensations that are physical, of the stillness of the body, and mental to some extent, because it's just very cozy, sitting quietly. But there's no vigilance, there's no sense of sharp alertness, watchfulness. And so sometimes we can spend some time like that, and then all of a sudden our bell rings or something, and then we open our eyes and stretch with a big smile on our face, and we're happy and relaxed. We had a little bit of a semi-conscious nap. And if we ask ourselves, were we really present here and now and sharp and alert? and relaxed, but there's that kind of sharpness of attention. We can't always answer yes to that. So coming back to this simile, and the guard is at the front gate, knowing who comes in and who leaves the city. It's really paying attention, checking on this body. Like the guard can't open the gates of the city in the morning, look at who comes in at dawn, and then go off and look after his own business and assume he's done his job. Someone may show up just after dawn, mid-morning, midday, like any time during his day's shift. The guard has to be vigilant. He doesn't know when different people come and go. So he needs to be present at the gate and actually pay attention. So when you're sitting with the body, we just sat down and the body has been moving, has been stimulated with sensations, with sights, with sounds. Maybe we were eating or drinking something, talking, watching something on TV or on the phone. We've been stimulated physically and mentally, and we sit down, and at first the body just has to settle. And the body tends to settle rather easily compared to the mind. But to stay at the gate and watching who comes in and out of the city, watching the body means really keeping an eye on the body. Noticing what it feels like when we sit down, and then keeping an eye on it. It's like when you have children, young children, and you take them out to the playground or you're taking them outside into a park. You can give them your full attention, or maybe they find some friends and go to the playground and you stay nearby and you can talk with the other parents, your other friends, but you keep an eye on the children. You don't just turn your back on them and then an hour later when you're finished talking, sort of, okay, where are the kids? You keep an eye on them. Just, it doesn't have to be 100% attention, but you know what's happening. There's a vigilance there. Are they okay? Are they safe? And so watching the body means keeping in touch with the body, asking ourselves what the body feels like as we sit down, and then staying with the body. It can be just scanning, it can be noticing from the top of the head down to the feet and back again. It can be asking ourselves just general areas of the body, what do they feel like? Keeping in mind just a general impression. Is it comfortable or is it uncomfortable as a whole? Overall picture. As I'm talking now, as you're listening, just noticing what the body feels like. And then sometimes noticing that it doesn't have very strong sensations, very strong feelings, but keeping an eye on that, noticing the changes. Because in this relationship to the body, remembering as we are not the body is an experience that arises in awareness. So if we are cultivating, taking awareness as our refuge, how do we get to notice awareness? And then notice sensations in the body arising in awareness and changing. Sensations of the in-breath compared to sensations of the out-breath. How certain areas of the body feel, and then 25 minutes into our session, noticing if there are any areas that start aching, feeling tight, feeling painful. And noticing the change. And in terms of cultivating this vigilance, this sharpness of attention, are we like that guard at the entrance of the city, paying attention mid-morning to who comes and goes, with the same quality of attention that we paid attention the moment we opened the gates, the moment we just sat down? Maybe mid-morning, the guard needs a cup of coffee. So half an hour into our sitting, maybe we need to just sit up a bit straighter, breathe in and out a bit deeper, do something to kind of liven up a bit, help this attention stay sharp. Then noticing in the mind as well, noticing what the state of the mind is when we sit down. Noticing what the general mood might be. Are there any emotions present? Just the way the body can feel energized and awake, or tired and like it just wants to crumple and sleep. The mind also feels energized, or maybe it doesn't feel energized, it feels tired. Investigating so that sharpness of attention is sustained by and feeds into this factor of enlightenment, investigation, taking an interest in what the mind is like right now. Restless or at peace. Or relaxed and confident or confused. Is the attention alert and sharp? Is the attention a little bit dull? The feelings of sleepiness, drowsiness, tiredness, worry, restlessness. And so noticing these things, not just experiencing them and being influenced by them, but actually noticing them, actively looking out for them. So that's when this guard who's guarding the city walks the perimeter of the wall. He can't just stand there at the gate the whole day. He gets sore legs, so he has to move around a bit. So when we're sitting here, we just go for the stillness without investigation, then the meditation and the mind can get pretty blocky. It starts feeling very kind of heavy. And the guard walks around the town, gets a bit of exercise, but he also gets to check the wall, making sure everything is safe. And so we're sitting here checking. When we sat down, we just put the body here, sit down still. We bring the mind to the body, to the present moment. And as we check on that a moment later, it can be 5 minutes later, it can be half an hour later, checking on that and noticing where are things at, how have things changed? Are there any distractions coming in? Is the wall keeping out people and the only exit and entrance and exit point is the main gate of the city? Are we here and now, knowing the present moment as it is, and knowing the body, knowing the mind, knowing the memories that may arise? Let them arise, but know them as they are just memories here and now, arising and ceasing, thoughts, emotions, moods. And the guard every now and then has to also climb up on the wall and look out at the horizon. If he wants his city to be safe, he needs to know well ahead of time if there are any dangers coming over the horizon, so he can prepare his defense. And so, in terms of watching the mind, cultivating this sharpness of attention and looking over the body and the mind, looking out for hindrances as they arise. If we're sitting in a peaceful environment, there may not be many outward distractions, but we get plenty of inner distractions, thoughts about the past, about the future. And depending on the thoughts and the memories that arise, it gives rise to sense desire, to ill will, liking and wanting, not liking, wanting to get rid of, a very restless experience. We can worry about the future, get anxious and afraid, or we can get bored and start feeling deflated, or we can just sit here and wonder if we're doing the right thing. So all these different hindrances can all arise just here and now, sitting quietly. So when the guard climbs to the top of the wall and looks out, it's really, as we sit down, establish the mind, noticing what the body feels like, noticing what the mind is like, state of mind. And always coming back to this awareness. So in Lompo's Sumedo's teaching, he's always reminding us of this supremacy of awareness, taking our stand with the witness. One of his talks recently was how not to be a witness, but rather witnessing. And he's always talking about this in terms of how awareness can be aware of anything physical and mental, but isn't the body. Awareness is aware of the body, but isn't the body. Awareness is aware of grumpiness, but awareness isn't grumpy. And just the titles of these talks and Q&As that get posted on YouTube are very good reminders. So bringing that really and bringing that into the meditation, asking ourselves when hindrances, about the hindrances, are there any present right now? It's like that guard looking out at the horizon, any danger. And if there are any present, then to know it as for what it is. Can we come back to awareness, knowing that when memory, a pleasant memory of something we experienced arises, we might desire for that to happen again. But we're not necessarily just trying to quash everything and get rid of everything. Get rid of memories, get rid of thoughts, get rid of hindrances, get rid of defilements, get rid of desire, get rid of suffering. That's operating from bhavatanha, from the desire to get rid of things, not wanting to experience, not wanting to be, to have. where there's the exercise of developing this investigation of what is arising and ceasing, and understanding mindfulness, understanding awareness, really just coming back to that. When sitting here and starting to feel sleepy, what is that feeling? Because awareness does not feel sleepy. We can actually sit for a while to practice. What is a holiday of the heart if I sit down and I feel tired and I actually do want to just lie down and rest? If I sit, what's a holiday of the heart then? What is awareness? If it can be aware of feeling sleepy, feeling drowsy, feeling lazy, but awareness isn't sleepy or drowsy or lazy, what is it? What is awareness if we're sitting here and the body is still? And you can notice the body really settling down, feeling comfortable and peaceful. And yet the mind can just be thinking, thinking, thinking. The mind does not necessarily feel peaceful and quiet. Sometimes we can pacify it, but sometimes we can't. So that experience of restlessness, if we can't get rid of it, how do we relate to it in terms of awareness? And it's really coming back to right now, restlessness is like this. Reminding ourselves that awareness is not restless. If there's a lot of thinking going on, awareness does not think. And if we sit here, whether there's restlessness or peace, knowing awareness isn't either. Awareness really knows. It just knows it's like this. And the sense of vigilance, of sharpness, of paying attention, the clarity of knowing here and now as it is. You get a sense for that, whether the mind is actually restless or peaceful, scattered or centered. We can make use of a period of sitting, even if the hindrances have arisen, are present. It's not peaceful and quiet and pleasant in terms of sankharas, in terms of the body, in terms of the mind. We might have been agitated or by excitement because we're experiencing fun stuff. It brings up a lot of energy and enjoyment, fun. Well, that's not necessarily peaceful, but that's okay. We can just notice what feeling excited and effervescent and bubbly is like. Or we can be happy and peaceful. And yet, even with that, when things settle and we sit, the body is still and the mind centers, focuses, and becomes still as well. There's a sharpness of the vigilance, of the attention that's observing. Looking out carefully, checking. Even as the body and the mind become tranquil, attention doesn't just settle with it, there's that knowing that it is tranquil, knowing that it is peaceful, and knowing that we're paying attention in terms of awareness of peace, awareness of tranquility. So this simile that the Buddha uses of the city guard, very useful. It helps us check on how we're paying attention. And then with this spirit of, and the spirit of guarding and protecting, using the four foundations of mindfulness as we call it the domain, the area where within which we keep awareness. So this is the beauty of the Noble Eightfold Path. Eightfold means 8 aspects. It's not 8 steps. And it's really interesting as we learn to understand, develop, cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path, seeing how all the factors support each other. So the very important aspect of right view, really learning to understand what we're looking at when we're looking at our experience, at the body and the mind, at the 5 khandhas. And seeing how, when we're operating from a sense of identifying with anything at all, with the body, with our feelings and moods, and with our history, we were all born on a certain day, grew up with a certain family in a certain place. We all have a history. But when we identify with that and we create a sense of self out of our life history, out of our meditation experiences, out of our sila, our samadhi, the insights that arise, when we identify with our views, our preferences, that inevitably is going to lead us to relate to these things coming from that perspective of me. I'm like this, I like this, and I don't like that. That's a view, but it's a view that is the source from which suffering arises because of that point we come to of self, operating from the sense of I am this body. I am my experience, my fears, my hopes, my likes and dislikes, my preferences. Operating from a sense of this is me, grasping it, that's a point of view. And it's a point of view of self. It's what we call sakyaditi. And because it leads to suffering, the Buddha calls that a wrong view in terms of the Noble Eightfold Path. It does not lead to liberation, it leads to entanglement and suffering. Using the establishing awareness of the same experience, but changing the point of view from which we witness it. What is it that where is it we can stand, which does not make this a self? And that brings us to these 4 foundations of mindfulness. The core foundations of mindfulness really speak of our whole experience, but just from a different point of view. Instead of this being me, this body, and the way it feels, the way it experiences pleasure and pain, instead of it being me, and then liking it or disliking it, wanting it, trying to hold on to health, to youth, to the senses operating well, to good eyesight, good hearing, fitness, and not wanting COVID, not wanting colds, not wanting upset stomachs, aging, not wanting to feel achy after we've been sitting for 45 minutes, not wanting to get old, not wanting to die. Instead of operating from me, this body, wanting, not wanting, the Buddha is proposing that we look at this body just in terms of the body. What does the body do? Bodies are born, age, get sick and die. It's the nature of the body. What do these bodies do when they stand, they walk, they sit, they lie down? There are these four postures that these bodies are always circling. How do we look at this body? You can look at it in terms of it breathes. It's a breathing body. Without the breath, it would die. Bodies breathe. And then when they die, they stop breathing. When they stop breathing, they die. It goes together. Noticing what these bodies do all day long. Right now, sitting is like this. And then moving is like this. What do we call awareness in all activities? Just noticing the body moving, going forwards, backwards, eating, chewing, swallowing, going to the bathroom, passing water and excrement, washing the body, rubbing soap on the skin to clean it, and then drying it, and then clothing it. If you have hair, combing it. And just noticing it in terms of the body and looking at feelings. You still have pleasant, unpleasant feelings, but noticing them in terms of feelings, in terms of the body, in terms of the mind, which is experiencing clarity or confusion, ill will or is free from ill will. It's experiencing desire, sense desire, or it's free from it. It is focused and centered, or maybe it's scattered and restless. It's concentrated or not. Just knowing whether the mind is developed and trained or not developed, still untrained, in training. And noticing Dhammas, like looking at our experience here and now, in terms of that fourth category of Dhammas, in terms of the Four Noble Truths, in terms of the six sense bases, in terms of the seven factors of enlightenment. So all these things the Buddha is talking about, I mean, it may seem like a long list, and it is a long list if we're not familiarized with it. But if we do familiarize ourselves with that list, read it, memorize it, recite it, investigate it, explore it, get to know it. Any of these is good because we're spending time learning how to relate to our experience here and now in terms of Dhamma, in terms of what it is, not in terms of how it is me. And so the very big difference between right view and wrong view, between looking at things in terms of Dhamma or looking at things in terms of self, Sakyaditi, when it's all about me, is precisely that singular first pronoun. When it's about me, that's the point of view. And from that point of view, as a result of taking that point of view, suffering arises. Without a need to change anything in our experience, but learning to just come back to here and now and investigating, investigating also means, how are we looking at things right now? Am I relating to things in terms of self? Am I experiencing suffering? Or what is it like when I do think in terms of me and mine? And then what is it like? What are things like? What is the experience like when I relate to the body in terms of the body? And think of it, just use thinking without the first person pronoun in the singular, without I, me. Notice the difference between my body and the body. What's happening to my body is very different from what is it that happens to bodies. Investigating that, noticing happiness and suffering, entanglement and freedom, passion and dispassion, the difference between these positions. And as we investigate these things, as we investigate Sakyaditi, really exploring it, not just trying to get rid of it because it's self, but what is self? What happens when we take self as a point of view? What happens when we take Dhamma as a point of view, the four foundations of mindfulness? So in the practice, when we're taking time to sit down and just watch the body and mind and create the conditions for them to settle, become tranquil and serene, but also noticing whether they do, whether they don't, and then exploring the relationship. As part of the practice, exploring the relationship we have to this body and mind in formal practice, but also in the rest of our days when we separate at the end of this session. We get up, we move on. Don't let mindfulness go. Don't just let go of that vigilance, and don't just let go of the four foundations of mindfulness, of investigation, of exploring, of asking ourselves, what is awareness? What is awareness that I can develop as a refuge, learn to recognize and stay with, no matter the changing of the conditions. So sitting, like we are now, is a condition. Conditions are like this. When conditions change, we close the session, we get up, we move. I go to say good morning to Long Paul. Noticing what happens. Noticing the body. So keeping that going. And so we're cultivating, when we train ourselves and cultivate, establishing attention here and now, keeping that vigilance and that sharpness of attention that knows what's going on here and now, that knows whether we're paying attention or not, that knows where we're paying attention from, where we're operating from. Did I slip and back into the point of view of self again? If so, how do I reestablish what is this in terms of Dhamma? Awareness of conditions. Can I know the conditions and be with the awareness? So I will leave these reflections here for now. I hope they're useful.
Andamayam Dhammakataya Sadhu Karanda Dhamma Sim Sadhu 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 Anumodam. Thank you so much, Ajahn.
People have any questions?
So the floor is now open for questions and answers. If you have any questions for Ajahn, please click on the raise hand button and we invite you to unmute. Ajahn has taken time off attending to Longpo to be with us this morning, his time. So it's really very precious to have a conversation with him. Right. We have our friend Naburan from India.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Bita. Thank you, Jan. My question is relating to, like in lay life, there's like several social like interactions here, like meeting with friends and families. And usually in these interactions, the discussions, sometimes I get entangled in, enjoy, in a certain way, enjoy certain topics of discussions are not really Dhamma. So you end up talking about certain politics, certain other things. And then later on, I feel regret that was not right speech. That was wrong speech. So in terms of that, I feel like, since the mindfulness is not there, should then more interaction should be avoided, or try to be more mindful and still stay connected with people, and how to balance that and how to take that like into the practice, how to practice relating to that. So that's the question. If it's clear.
We learn from our experiences. So we have these ideals, we have these guidelines, for example, that precepts give us guidelines for speech. But the whole of the practice is about suffering and the end of suffering. And that's something that we experience here and now in the heart. And so learning from our experience means that sometimes we can look at a situation and suss out pretty quickly whether engaging in a certain course of action is going to be beneficial or not beneficial. But in terms of training the mind, we're not starting, we won't need the training if we knew how to get everything right just right off the bat. And so it means that we're going to operate in practice from a position where we're still relating to experience, coming from likes and dislikes, coming from habit, coming from self, identifying with this or that. And so we take positions. And so learning how to recognize that and then how to step back from it is a learning process. And so we learn from our mistakes. So watching how things feel in terms of happiness or suffering, in terms of entanglement or freedom. Watching those processes is really important. We cannot let go if we don't understand grasping. We won't recognize wisdom if we don't appreciate ignorance. And in learning what we call wholesome and what is unwholesome, really means what leads to suffering, or what leads to more suffering, or what leads to less suffering. Suffering is an experience here. And so in learning how to recognize that, it's really being willing to experience it. That's why the first noble truth is there is suffering. We need to be willing to just go, it's like this. I had this kind of conversation and now it feels like this. Regret is like this. Feeling not so good about having had this kind of conversation or having participated in this way or whatever it is. Learning from that. And it's very good to remind ourselves of this right view and wrong view, these positions from which we relate to experience, because even in trying to refine our sila, trying to be careful of our speech, if we're operating from a sense of self, again, suffering is the result. So we can have conversations like that and then feel regret and then blame ourselves or feel hopeless, or we always do the same thing. Notice how you relate to that. So when, for example, as you mentioned, regret arises, just notice, okay, well, engaging in that type of action, that course of speech or whatever it is, the result is this. What can I learn from it? So you're really looking, you're not necessarily looking at it in terms of self. I did good, I did bad. It's more investigate this type of speech. What was the result of that? How does it leave me feeling? How did it leave other people feeling? Was it useful? Does it lead to tranquility? Does it lead to peace? Does it lead to relinquishment, to dispassion, to liberation? And just use that as a guide. And come back and look here at how it feels, because this is where we learn. And the Buddha was always talking about knowing gratification, danger, and escape. In the case of the way we relate to experience through the 6 sense doors, knowing gratification. I mean, if we get into a conversation about politics, I mean, we all can feel a certain way about what's happening in the world, in England, in the US, in India, or wherever, in Singapore, wherever it is in the world you are, things happen that makes us feel a certain way. We can't help that. That's just the result of conditioning. And then if we follow those feelings, if we get involved with them, then we can start talking politics or family business or work or anything with a sense of involvement, of self being involved and wanting something out of it or wanting to get rid of something. If we do that, just watch. Try to pay attention why this is happening. And if sometimes mindfulness isn't so present, then afterwards, come back and just sit with it. What does it feel like? And if it doesn't feel so good, just notice, well, okay, that didn't work so well, did it? And relating to it in terms of what does this type of action result in? What does that type of action result in? Experimenting. So you use whatever arises and investigate it. Because as we learn to recognize the suffering that arises as a consequences of our actions by body, speech, and mind, recognizing the suffering that arises is what informs us in terms of understanding. And then the way to the end of suffering becomes clear because we're understanding suffering. We're open to suffering, we're willing to experience it, but not in the sense of self, not coming from me, wanting to be happy, wanting to avoid suffering, as much as knowing which courses of action lead to more suffering and which do not. And inevitably, you end up with restraint. Restraint in terms of sila, restraint in terms of the way we bring attention to things, what we allow our attention to follow, or whether we bring it back and establish it here and now. And restraint in terms of coming back home, not letting the mind go out into the world of sankharas, of conditions, but coming back home to stay with awareness. Is that helpful?
Yeah. Thank you, Dhamma Jan. It's really helpful. Good to see you.
Anyone else with a question for Tanajan? Well, perhaps maybe if I could request Tanajan, could you speak a little bit about right effort?
No, that's an interesting one. The right effort is something to really understand in the context of the Noble Eightfold Path, because effort needs to be guided properly. So that means establishing right view, a proper understanding of the Four Noble Truths, a proper understanding of suffering, how it arises and how it ceases. Because if we don't, whatever efforts we make are going to be guided by our understanding or lack thereof. And it's very easy to make a lot of effort that's misguided. So the definition of right effort in the Noble Eightfold Path, there are two that are related to unwholesome states and two that are related to wholesome states. So the way the right effort is defined is in terms of wholesome and unwholesome, which really brings it back to understanding what causes suffering and what causes the absence of suffering. And for each of these, in each of these cases, the two types of effort in each case is really about whether unwholesome states have arisen or have not yet arisen, whether wholesome states have arisen or not yet arisen. And so we try to avoid unwholesome states that haven't arisen or abandon unwholesome states that have arisen. We try to give rise to wholesome states that haven't arisen, and we cultivate wholesome states that have arisen. So those are the four types of right effort. And it's really interesting to see how in defining right effort in this way, the Buddha embeds in the definition this notion of wholesome and what is unwholesome and what is wholesome, what is unbeneficial, what is beneficial. So it implies investigation. So we're not just bullheadedly pushing forward without looking at what we're doing. We look at what's happening, what's going on, and apply effort according to what's happening. We can't do that if we don't stop and look at the situation we have in front of us. So it's very important to understand that aspect of right effort. It really needs to be informed by right understanding. And we can easily have an attitude of putting forth energy and effort in the practice, having a regular routine and putting in a lot of energy, but not necessarily coming from the right place. I mean, I certainly did that. There was a period when I came back to, I was at Wat Nana Chat for almost a year when I was 19, 20 years old. And the experiences that I had really stayed with me, very, very powerful memories. I went back to Switzerland, I studied, I worked. Basically 10 years went by, and then I decided to go back to the monastery. And I was very much operating from these memories of what I had experienced at 19, 20 years old. And I put in a lot of effort into the practice, trying to reconnect with all the good stuff that I had experienced back then. And very quickly, without realizing it, I found myself wanting the same kind of mindfulness, wanting the same kind of samadhi experiences, concentration, these kind of ideas that we have of experiencing clear, tranquil, stable states of mind that come from practice, hungering for the insights that arise, hungering for the pace at which these insights arise. And all of that was operating from memory. For a while, I even was harboring the notion that I'd wasted 10 years of my life, not ordaining right away when I was 20 years old and going back to lay life. And the result of all of that was suffering. And as I learned, and I started to recognize the suffering and recognize that it was the result of this point of view that I was operating from, remembering something good from the past and wanting to make it a reality here and now again. So I was putting in a lot of effort. I was walking and sitting, putting in the hours, exercising restraint, doing my chores in the monastery, but trying not to get caught up in chatting at the dying shed at tea time and all of that. So I was putting in a lot of effort, and it felt right, but the result wasn't. The result was that I was ending up feeling tight and high-strung and frustrated and very critical and unhappy of the results arising. The more I pushed into this direction, the worse it got. But in many ways, every one of us in the practice have to go through this in one way or another. So learning to recognize right effort, it also means we need to learn to recognize wrong effort. In the same way I was talking earlier, learning to recognize right view, look how things are when we look at things in terms of Dhamma, what they are, without coming from this sense of me, of self. That's the center of the world. Recognizing what a sense of self is. What is it that we call me? And so using the Buddha's teachings to investigate that, basically in terms of the 5 aggregates, the 5 khandhas, and really understanding how they are just dhammas and how we do project a sense of self that we create out of thinking, project that onto these 5 aggregates and then operate from this creation, this figment of our imagination. So in order to really recognize right view and operate from right view, we really need to understand self-view. What is a self? What happens when we operate from a sense of self? So in terms of effort, it's the same thing. Learning to recognize effort that is guided from right view in terms of Dhamma, rather than effort that's arising from self. I want very high levels of pure sila. I want to develop samadhi. I want the jhanas, the rupa jhanas. They are rupa jhanas. I want wisdom. I want insight. I want to be wise. All these things are correct. They're all coming from me wanting something. And so the result is going to inevitably be unsatisfying and suffering. So learning to recognize effort before we put forth effort, where are we operating from? So it really means establishing right view, right understanding. And then there's another aspect of right effort, is this very beautiful progression that the standard description that we find in the suttas presents. So there's the defining each type of four efforts as trying to avoid unwholesome states that haven't arisen, abandon unwholesome states that have arisen, give rise to wholesome states that haven't arisen, and cultivate wholesome states that have. Each one of these four types of right effort in the suttas is always introduced by the same sentence, the same sequence. One gives rise to desire, endeavors, makes an effort, and strives towards. And it's a strives for the sake of these four kinds of right effort. And that sequence that introduces the four types of right effort is a very, very beautiful sequence. And I'd encourage everyone to actually just find it in the suttas. If you have the book, if you have many Majjhima Nikaya, any collection of suttas, just go online and look up this standard description of the four types of right effort and pay attention to that sequence, the introductory sequence to each one of the four. It starts with generating desire. And that's a very interesting one because it's describing a situation where we don't yet avoid unwholesome, abandon the unwholesome, give rise to or cultivate the wholesome, but we aspire to it. We would like to. And how this applies to our daily lives is like we can all recognize that maybe we have habits that are not necessarily good habits. I mean, hopefully it's not the habit of murdering and thieving and committing adultery and some sort of really heavy stuff, but they're just habits that we have in our daily lives that are not necessarily helpful or useful. Thinking habits, ways of relating to things that lead to mood patterns or emotional patterns that we may recognize as that's how I am, it's my personality. It's speech habits, ways of speaking. Speech patterns in the way of the type of reactions and emotions that come out in our speech, or the kind of moods and emotions that we tend to speak on rather than not speak on, refrain. It can be physical behavior, things we do throughout the day, habitual things. And some of these things we realize are not necessarily beneficial, or actually they land us in this kind of situation that you were asking about in the previous question, where we engage in talk and then we regret. It doesn't have to be a kind of devastating regret, but we just don't feel so good about it and wish we hadn't. And right effort in this kind of situation is generating desire, generating that intention, and just thinking, I wish I didn't do that. That thought itself is already right effort. So when we think of right effort, it doesn't necessarily only mean we successfully avoid unwholesome things, and as soon as anything unwholesome arises, we abandon it. Like it's a burning coal, we drop it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we instantly give rise to everything wholesome and then cultivate it until it's blossomed completely. That's also part of right effort. Well, that's expertise in right effort. We can also be still bumbling fools full of ignorance and tons of bad habits, but right effort is already being cultivated when we realize that and we generate the desire, generate the wish. I wish I could avoid. I'd like to find a way to avoid this kind of behavior, this kind of speech, this kind of way of thinking. I may not yet know how, I may not yet understand how to do that, but I aspire to that. I aspire to recognize good qualities, wholesome qualities. I aspire to develop the 7 factors of enlightenment, the 4 powers, the 5 faculties. And just formulating that intention is a very, very powerful initial step, which qualifies as right effort. And so in the practice, in a way, as we're paying attention, it doesn't really matter where you find yourself at. And so wherever it is that we're at, we might feel hopeful, or sometimes we might relate to our practice with some measure of despair and hopelessness, thinking there's just no this training is tough. I don't know how I'm going to get past these things, or learn how to stop doing things, or learning how to cultivate certain qualities. And rather than giving to hopelessness and to despair and throw our arms up and say, this practice doesn't work, get on with life, don't do that. Right effort is also just the simple thought, I would like to. I wish I could find a way to avoid the unwholesome, abandon unwholesome, give rise to and cultivate the wholesome. And having that wish, allowing that wish to arise as a wholesome aspiration in the mind is right effort, and then nourishing it. And then in that sequence, generating desire is the first step, and then endeavoring. And as we nourish that desire, every time that desire arises, paying attention to it, valuing it, nourishing it, and then it starts picking up energy, and it becomes an endeavor. And then putting forth energy into it, and it grows. And then striving. So it's a progressive development. There's a gradation. There's a growth in right effort, guided by right view.
Thank you so much, Jan. That's so beautifully summarized. I think that the right effort right now, it's been a great pleasure for us all to have you gather in this occasion with us. The right effort for us to do right now is to share the aspirations with all beings out there, and to also let you go to attend to Lumpur, who is perhaps waiting for you for coffee. May I please invite you, Tanajan, to lead us in chanting the verses of sharing and inspiration.
Do you have them to put up on the screen for people to follow?
Yes, I do. Okay.
Now let us chant the verses of sharing and aspiration. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, may my spiritual teachers and guides of great virtue, my mother, my father, and my relatives, the sun and the moon, and all virtuous leaders of the world, may the highest gods and evil forces, celestial beings, guardian spirits of the earth, and the Lord of death, may those who are friendly, indifferent, or hostile, may all beings receive the blessings of my life. May they soon attain the threefold bliss and realize the deathless. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, and through this act of sharing, may all desires and attachments quickly cease, and all harmful states of mind, until I realize Nibbana in every kind of birth. May I have an upright mind, with mindfulness and wisdom, austerity and vigor. May the forces of delusion not take hold, nor weaken my resolve. The Buddha is my excellent refuge. Unsurpassed is the protection of the Dhamma. The solitary Buddha is my noble guide. The Sangha is my supreme support. Through the goodness of all these, may the darkness and delusion be dispelled.
Araham Sama Sambuddho Bhagava Buddha Bhagavanta Abhivademi Swatado Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supadipano Bhagavato Sawaka Sangho Sangham Namah. Thank you so much, Tanajan. Have a wonderful winter retreat. Send our best regards and respectful greetings to Lompo Sumedo.
Gladly. Thank you. Thank you for organizing this. I
Thank
hope
you.
it was official. Always we're reflecting on Dhamma.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And we'll see you very, very soon. Take care.
May you all be well.